Welcome everyone to our educational webinar on understanding what's in your vaccine, covering ingredients, development, and safety. My name is Mary Elizakowski, and I'm a Coalition Health Director with Foundation for a Healthy North Dakota. Our nonprofit organization was established in 2022 with a mission to promote health and wellness across North Dakota by working at the community level. We are in the process of establishing a statewide coalition that will enable local communities to collaborate and work together on common initiatives. By becoming a member of the coalition, you will be the first to receive information about educational opportunities like this one, updates on relevant public health information, legislative news, as well as access to digital advocacy resources and toolkits. Some housekeeping things to let you know about. Webinar attendees will be automatically muted for the presentation. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. We will be recording this presentation and we'll leave time in the end to address any questions along with the ones that came in during registration. After the presentation, a link to the recording will be sent out along with an evaluation survey to complete. It's my pleasure to introduce our presenter today. Dr. Ryan Hassan is a pediatrician in Happy Valley, Oregon, and the medical director of Boost Oregon, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families make evidence-based decisions about vaccines. As Boost Oregon's medical director, Dr. Hassan hosts community workshops for parents to learn about vaccines and educational workshops for healthcare providers and community health workers to discuss how to promote vaccine confidence. Welcome, and I will turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Mary. Hi, everyone. Nice to be here. Thanks for joining us today. I'm excited to be able to share the information I have today about vaccines that hopefully will help all of you make your own decisions about vaccines and answer some of the common questions I get in my clinic as a pediatrician. Give me 1 second here, make sure I'm sharing the right thing. There we go. Okay. So today I'm going to talk, I gotta move things so I can read properly. There we go. Today I'm just going to talk about some of the, I think, most important information that people should know when they're making decisions about their vaccines, questions that I commonly get from my own patients. And hopefully at the end we'll have some time for any other questions that you may have that I haven't covered. A little bit about Boost Oregon. We're a parent-led nonprofit. Our goal is to try to provide science-based information, answer questions, empower families and communities to make informed health decisions for themselves, and just create safe spaces for people to learn and have questions answered without feeling judged or condescended to. Yeah, that's what we try to do. So this is one of the ways in which we do that. So a lot of what we do is talks like this or other kind of community discussions or in workshops where we bring people together to have conversations or answer questions. We also try to inform healthcare providers to teach them how to have effective conversations that are respectful of patients and help them to learn how to communicate effectively and kindly and respectfully. And then we provide trainings as well to help other people learn skills to have more effective vaccine conversations. I understand there are some people in here who work in healthcare or may be wanting ways to learn about how to have these sorts of discussions. So that is something we also do at Boost. But today, my goal is to just try to create a comfortable environment where everyone can just learn about vaccines, learn about some of the most common questions and misconceptions that I hear about vaccines. Particularly, we're going to focus on how they work, how they're made, and how we monitor vaccine safety. And then we're going to review some of the common side effects you should know about. And if anyone does have questions throughout, please just feel free to put them in the chat. I do want to try to make sure I get to any questions through the end of the presentation. So the first question I get a lot is, do we really need vaccines? Are they necessary? And my answer is yes. And I think this is a good depiction of why that is. Um, Infectious diseases used to be one of the leading causes of death in the U.S. and really in the whole world. Now, most people have never seen the diseases that vaccines are designed to prevent because of how successfully vaccines have worked. And these two kind of circle graphs show the relative amount of diseases we saw from childhood vaccine to preventable diseases back in the early 1900s compared to today. And you can see that we don't see these diseases almost at all anymore. We've had such success with vaccines that the risk of these diseases is plummeted dramatically, especially in the case of smallpox, which is completely eliminated from the U.S., and then polio, which until a couple of summers ago, we hadn't seen in the US in a long, long time. But of course, these diseases aren't completely eradicated, so we still do see some cases. Um, we know it's vaccines that are the reason for this case drop because if you look at numbers over time of diseases of these vaccine preventable diseases throughout the US, you can see that case rates just drop immediately after vaccinations are become routine. So these are rates of measles in the US, cases per 100,000 people, and you can see, there's several cases every year, several hundred per 100,000 people. And then 1953, we get, or sorry, 1959, we get the measles vaccine, and then we just don't see it anymore. Now, case that where there have been some spikes since then in places, especially like Oregon, where I live, where we've had drops in vaccination rates. But when vaccination rates remain high, we just don't see the disease. This is HIB, Haemophilus influenza type B. It's a bacteria. It's not the same as influenza virus, which many of you are probably more familiar with. This used to cause a lot of cases of infections around the brain and bloodstream in babies. Once we had a vaccine introduced, cases just kind of plummeted. Once we introduced a booster vaccine, they plummeted even further. This is polio, which became a problem in the early 1900s, started spreading more among middle and upper class children, probably due to changes in sanitation measures. Was a huge epidemic across the country. Kids were afraid to go swimming in the summertime because of it. Anyone in the audience who might be older who has older relatives might remember getting this vaccine in the 50s and how much of a scare it was before then. But then the vaccine came around, and like I said, we just haven't seen it since, except, of course, for you may have heard of the case that came from abroad back in a couple of years ago in New York. Pneumococcus, also called strep pneumonia, we introduced a vaccine, cases have plummeted. And then COVID, I think everyone's familiar with. This graph's a little bit different. This shows rates of disease in 2021 and 2022 between comparing rates of disease between people who are unvaccinated, the top black line, compared to people who had gotten a vaccine without a booster dose, that middle dotted line, compared to people who had a vaccine and a booster dose, which is that very bottom solid line. So you can see that vaccine made a huge difference in how likely people were to get the disease. And then flu, which again, this is a little bit of a different infographic, but again, same kind of idea. This is just an example from the year 2018 to 2019. There were more than 58,000 flu hospitalizations prevented, 3,500 flu deaths prevented, and over 4 million, nearly 4.5 million just influenza illnesses that were prevented by the flu vaccine. And that's with only about half of the people in the US getting a flu vaccine each year. So that's a lot of success. Now, the question, of course, is why do we still need vaccines? And the answer is because, even though things are a lot better, they're still not great. We still have many cases of vaccine preventable diseases each year, and several tens of thousands of deaths from flu each year. So this is why vaccination continues to be important. So how do vaccines work? I really like talking about how vaccines work because I think it's actually pretty easy to understand compared to other medicines. I mean, I don't really honestly remember the way most of the medicines that I use now are as a physician work because it's just this complex physiology that doesn't really remain relevant anymore, but at least in my practice. But with vaccines, it's actually quite simple by comparison. It's a lot easier to understand how a vaccine works compared to, say, Tylenol. Um, So the way I like to explain it, so we have our, each of our bodies have an immune system that create proteins called antibodies, and they have special immune cells that are designed to identify harmful germs that we need to that could cause us illness, and to attack and eliminate them from our body. Um, so in general, what happens if you are exposed to a pathogen, a germ, a deadly germ or a dangerous germ, a virus or a bacteria, whatever germ comes into your body, it starts to replicate. This shows the example of a virus going into your body and replicating. It uses your cells to replicate its own DNA and make copies of itself. Bacteria work a little differently, but in either case, a germ will get into your body and replicate and spread millions and millions of times, and spread as far as it can to as many places as it can, in order basically just to survive. That's what they do, right? And in the meantime, it does a lot of harm to our bodies. So when that happens, our bodies try to fight back, and they do this by creating what's called antibodies. These are proteins that our immune system makes to identify specific parts of the germ and attach onto them so that our body can eliminate them from the body. It takes some time to do this. It usually takes a few weeks, which is why usually when you get sick with, a given cold, flu, COVID, strep, measles, anything like that, you're going to get usually a week or so where things just steadily get worse and worse and worse, and you feel horrible. And then hopefully, most times, eventually you'll start to feel better. So, your immune system will make symptoms like a fever to try to fight off the infection. You might get cough to try to get rid of all this, whatever germ is kind of replicating in your lungs. Um, and so all of this immune response from your body, as well as the inflammation directly caused by the germ, will cause you to get sick until eventually you have enough antibodies in your body, enough of a strong immune response to be able to kill off the germ, and then you get better. And then after that happens, for most diseases, you have an immune response later that you're able to use to prevent future infection. So that's the way our body reacts when we get sick. The way a vaccine works is it allows us to create that same protection without getting sick in the first place. So instead of being, having your body exposed to an actual disease, an actual germ like flu, COVID, or measles, or mumps, we expose our bodies intentionally to a very specific part of the germ, usually just, a little bit of a protein or a sugar off the germ. And our bodies see that and make the same immune response they would otherwise. Oftentimes a stronger immune response, because we picked the part of the germ that's better at making immune responses. And it does all the same things. It creates inflammation and creates antibody proteins to fight and attack, so that later on it has those same antibodies available to fight off the disease. But the difference is that you don't get sick because you don't have a live germ that's replicating millions of times and trying its best to spread all over your body and get you as sick as it can. Instead, you have usually no symptoms, but maybe a few symptoms like fever or redness in the arm, because of your immune system creating those same symptoms to make you immune. And we'll talk more about those side effects later. Um, so that's kind of the main difference between, getting sick with a disease versus getting a vaccine, and that's how the vaccine works. It simulates that same immune response, but without having you to forcing you to fight an entire replicating live germ. So the next thing I think is helpful to understand, that I get a lot of questions about, is how do we actually make vaccines? How do you turn a germ into a vaccine? And there's 4 ways right now that we commonly do this. Um, and I'll give credit to my brother for these graphics if you like them. He's the one who put these together. I think they're kind of cute. So one common way that we can make vaccines is if you the purple thing on your screen here, that's a little germ, a little virus in this case. So one way that we make vaccines is we take a germ, a virus, and we weaken it. We grow it in animal cells so that it gets better at replicating in those, and it's not as good at replicating inside a human cell. So we do that in order to make it not as good at infecting humans. So that we can then be exposed to it safely and it won't be able to make us sick. So this is how the MMR vaccine, the varicella or chickenpox vaccine are made, rotavirus vaccine. There's an oral polio virus we don't really use anymore, but it's made this way as well. And then there's the intranasal flu vaccine, which is a nasal spray for the flu. So those are all examples of what are called live attenuated virus vaccines. So you take the vaccine and you weaken it so that it can still replicate a little bit, but it can't really cause you harm. Now, one important thing to know about this is these vaccines could potentially harm people who don't have any immune system, because if you can't just fight off any virus at all, no matter how weak, then these could be dangerous. So live virus vaccines are not recommended for people who are severely immunocompromised. So if you have HIV/AIDS, if you are on chemotherapy for cancer, those would be vaccines that you wouldn't want to get. Another way of thinking about this is an analogy that a colleague of mine made that I really like. It's the idea of taking a wolf and breeding it over thousands of generations, and you get puppies, household dogs. It's the same species, but we just choose the ones that we like, that are nice, that don't bite, and we get we breed dogs. So that's kind of the same idea here. We just choose the virus that's grown over generations that isn't harmful to us. Another way to make a vaccine is you can just kill a germ. You take it, you inactivate it, you kill it, and then it can't do anything, but it still looks the same. So your body sees it when you get it injected in the vaccine, and it creates that same immune response, even though it's not actually a threat. So inactivated vaccines like this include the inactivated polio vaccine, which is the one we usually get in the US, hepatitis A, the influenza shot, and then the rabies vaccine, which hopefully no one here will need to get. That one is pretty uncomfortable, but that's one is you only really get if you are exposed or potentially could be exposed to rabies. And then a third way we make vaccines is we just use a part of the virus or bacteria called the antigen. So the specific protein or sugar that's on the surface of the bacteria, we take that by itself and we use that in the vaccine. So our body recognizes that antigen, creates the immune response it needs to destroy it, and that immune response is able to destroy the whole germ when we see it later. But the whole germ isn't in the vaccine, so you don't have to worry about it. So those types of vaccines include the HPV vaccine, human papillomavirus, hepatitis B, shingles, which is a vaccine for older adults, and then the DTaP, pneumococcal vaccine, and meningococcal vaccine. Last way we make vaccines, which is the most new way, is the mRNA vaccines or genetic vaccines. So this is the COVID vaccine, essentially, the Pfizer and Moderna COVID vaccines. This one's a little more difficult to explain, but it works the same way, and it's, I think, actually one of the ways that has the greatest potential for creating even more effective vaccines in the future. So in this case, what we do is we find the protein, the antigen that we need to create an immune response to. But unlike in the case of kind of this kind of vaccine where you take part of the protein and you just put it straight into the vaccine, in this one, we find the genetic code that you need to create that protein. And then we use that genetic code as the vaccine and let our bodies actually turn that genetic code into a protein by itself. And then we make an immune response to that protein. So same kind of idea in that our body sees the protein it needs to create the immune response it needs to protect us later. The difference is with the mRNA vaccine, we're able to not have to grow any kind of live virus or bacteria. We don't have to worry about correctly purifying or sterilizing anything, because all we're doing is creating a strand of mRNA without any kind of live germs or materials. And then that goes straight into our body, and our body knows how to deal with that because it translates trillions of strands of mRNA every day. So same kind of idea there. All right, so that's kind of an overview of how we make vaccines. And then I think one of the biggest questions I get is how do we make sure that they're actually safe and effective? So there's bottom line is we have much more robust safety mechanisms for vaccines than we do for really anything else you're going to buy. Any other medicines, for sure, definitely more so than foods, and way more so than products you'll get at the store, household products, baby products, even in particular. If we had the same regulatory mechanisms on all these other products, it might be a lot harder to get them onto the market, but we certainly wouldn't have the same level of safety concerns with some of them. So the way vaccine safety or vaccines are monitored during development, it starts with first you get preclinical trials and tests of concept on all this, and then animal trials and everything. And once we have something that we feel, I say we, I don't actually make vaccines, but once the vaccine makers have something they feel is a viable product that is safe and effective, they will start with phase 1 trials. I think a lot more people are familiar with these since COVID, because this became much more of a national discussion topic of how the trials work. But phase 1 trials, essentially just a few dozen volunteers, and we're trying to answer the questions: is the vaccine safe? Does it seem to work? Are there any serious side effects we're seeing? And how does the dose size relate to the side effects? Is there a optimal dosage or something like that? After phase 1 trials, we go on to phase 2 trials. This includes several hundred volunteers. And in this, we're really trying to figure out more about what are the common short-term side effects and how are volunteers' immune systems responding to the vaccine. So those are the first 2 trials. And then after that is when we start the phase 3 trials. And this is where we really know, after a few months of phase 3, that this is going to be a very safe product that we can confidently administer to the public. And the phase 3 trials tell us how do people who get the vaccine and people who do not get the vaccine compare. Is it safe? We know, we can, we're looking at all the time, but in this trial we see, if there's hundreds or thousands, commonly it's actually 10 to 30,000 people. That it was about, I think, about 30,000 people in trials for COVID and trials for HPV. So we are able to see on a much broader scale any side effects. So that's really, I think, where this is most helpful. It's only after phase 3 trials that a vaccine can be licensed. So for that, that's where the FDA comes in. Of course, they monitor rules and regulations throughout the entire vaccine process. But then after phase 3 trials is when FDA decides to look and review the data and make sure everything seems up to par. And if they agree that it's safe, that's when they will license it. And then CDC will have to come in and say, okay, yes, we recommend it and how we recommend it. And then and only then will it be allowed on the market. And then, of course, there's ongoing manufacturing monitoring to make sure that each batch of vaccine is safe, and the manufacturing processes are safe and following appropriate protocols. So that's essentially the vaccine production process and how you get from the idea to actually having a vaccine on the market. Now, with phase 3 trials, you can go through phase 3 trials and you can have 30,000 people take a vaccine and see, okay, wow, there's no side effects, no serious side effects. Everything's pretty minor. But if there's a very rare side effect that only happens 5 times every million doses, you're not going to be able to find that until you've actually vaccinated millions of people. So that's why we continue to monitor vaccine safety after they've been licensed, in a way that we really don't for any other product, any other medicine. So these are some of the main monitoring systems: the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, Vaccine Safety Data Link, and the Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment Project. They all work slightly differently, but the idea is essentially if there's anything going on, any side effects people have after a vaccine, or we're seeing increased rates of a particular health condition or problem after a vaccine, that gets reported. And if anything is flagged as a potential safety marker, then that gets looked at and studies are done to see, okay, is this actually related to the vaccine? So this is the most recent example that some people may remember of this or may have heard of this is with the COVID vaccine, which of course is our newest vaccine. We were able to use the VAERS system, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, to find that there was a risk for heart inflammation after the vaccine. Now, it was a very rare, otherwise we would have already found it before the vaccine was on the market. It happened about, I think, 5 times per million doses, and it was really only mostly happening in adolescent teens. But we were able to use the VAERS system to find that we were seeing more cases of heart inflammation. So that prompted a study, prompted a temporary pause in vaccination, so we could look at that. And then we were able to identify that, yes, that is actually a true side effect, and this is what the rate of it is. And now we know that that's a rare side effect of that vaccine. Now, it's still safer to get it than to not get it, and I'll show those numbers a little later. But the idea is with these, we can make sure that anytime we have a very rare side effect, we're still going to be able to find it. There was one instance in the last few decades where a vaccine was actually removed from the market because of this. We found with the prior rotavirus vaccine, it causes a problem in the gut called intussusception, causes some pain and discomfort, and it was about as frequent with the vaccine as it was without the vaccine. So it didn't really help to get the vaccine. So that vaccine was removed from the market when we found that, and now we have a new one that doesn't cause that problem. Okay, so that's kind of safety monitoring. And again, I know this is all kind of a lot of information. So please, if you're having questions or want more information, let me know. And I'm happy to follow up with people afterwards if we run out of time. But moving on to what's in vaccine ingredients. I'm going to take the example of HIB, Haemophilus influenza B. This is a vaccine for babies given at 2, 4, and 6 months typically. And these are the only ingredients in it. You have the purified bacteria polysaccharide. Polysaccharide means sugar, so this is just a sugar that is on the outside of the bacteria. So again, this is like one of those partial germ vaccines where we take just part of that germ, just the sugar in this case, and that is used as the antigen, the protein or the sugar that our body sees to create an immune response it needs. And the second part of this vaccine is the inactivated tetanus toxoid. This is a protein from the tetanus bacteria. It's been inactivated. That's what a toxoid means. It means it's not a toxin. It can't hurt you. But we use that because babies don't actually create great immune responses to sugars. So if we attach it to a protein, then it works better. We have a better immune response. And then sucrose, which is sugar. That's really it. So these are the ingredients of the vaccine. Now, if you look at a vaccine ingredient and excipient list on the CDC, it will list all non-ingredients, excipients. These are things that are used to grow and purify, neutralize the vaccine. Those are things like the cell culture that the vaccine grown in, ammonium sulfate, which is used to purify proteins by making them come out of the solution, and then formalin, which prevents contamination. It inactivates any kind of potential germs or contaminants in there. So those aren't actual ingredients. They're used in the manufacturing process, but they're listed because you might have trace amounts of them. So this is similar to the way in which if you read a food packaging label, it might say something like this is processed in a facility that also processes peanuts. Peanuts aren't an ingredient, but you might see some trace amount because you can't perfectly remove it. So that's an example of one vaccine. And again, this is pretty similar for all vaccines. You're going to have an antigen. You might have something to make the vaccine work a little better, like a protein or an adjuvant like aluminum. And then you have sugar and buffers and things like that. So going into a little more details, some of the things I commonly get asked about, aluminum is often a concern for people. One thing to know, it's not a heavy metal. It's a common misconception. It's a light metal. Also, heavy metals aren't necessarily bad. It's kind of a bad connotation with heavy metals, and some are dangerous. But it's kind of just this buzzword that we often get scared about, but it's actually doesn't really mean anything particularly. Aluminum is the third most common element in the Earth's crust, and it's the most common metal on Earth. So it's a very safe metal. We know how to process it in our bodies. That's why it was chosen as what's called an adjuvant in some vaccines. That means it is used in some vaccines in order to allow us to use less of the antigen, the protein or the sugar, and create a better immune response that causes fewer side effects. Aluminum is a skin irritant, so it will sometimes cause the redness you see in the skin after a vaccine. And that basically just tells the body, hey, pay attention. You need to come over here and fight off, this thing here. So it allows us to get a better immune response. So and as this graph shows, you'll find much more aluminum in baby formula, soy formula. This is regular cow's milk formula. If you use soy formula, it's closer to like 100 plus milligrams. Or even breast milk has more aluminum than our vaccines do. And again, it doesn't matter because we know how to get rid of aluminum. If we couldn't, we wouldn't be able to survive on planet Earth. So the amount of aluminum in vaccines is so small, you can't even detect a change in the level in your body after you get vaccinated. Another common concern I hear about is mercury. Now, first thing to know is that childhood vaccines do not have mercury in them. They were removed, I forget the year, early 2000s. But I think the second thing to know is that the mercury that is still in some vaccines and used to be in vaccines isn't dangerous anyway. So the key here to know is there's a difference between ethyl mercury, which is the byproduct of thimerosal, which is found in multi-dose vaccines like the multi-dose flu vaccine. And that is very safe. It's removed from your body in less than a week. Or rather, its half-life is less than a week, and we know how to process it very easily. It just gets peed out. Now that is ethyl mercury, but that is different from methyl mercury with an M. That is removed from the body. Its half-life is about 1.5 months, so it stays in the body much longer. And that is the mercury that's found in fish, in tuna fish, for example, or especially swordfish or shark, if anyone eats shark. That is a much more dangerous metal potentially because it can build up in the body in dangerous levels. So it's similar to methanol versus ethanol. Ethanol you might drink at dinner, and methanol is antifreeze, it's poison. If you drink that, you're not going to do very well. So that's the difference between methyl mercury and ethyl mercury. So this shows kind of the amount of ethyl mercury in a flu vaccine. It's just 25 micrograms compared to a single can of tuna would have 50 micrograms of the more dangerous methyl mercury. So very important distinction there. It is not dangerous, and it is not the same as the mercury you need to avoid in fish. Other point, it is okay to eat a can of tuna. You can eat some mercury. You just don't want to have too much. Everything can be dangerous if you eat too much of it. So that's why, for example, if you're pregnant, it's advised to limit how much mercury you take in, how much fish you eat. And then another ingredient just I'd like to call out is formaldehyde. You may have seen formalin as one of those inactivating ingredients in that ingredient list I mentioned. Formaldehyde is often considered, it has this kind of negative connotation. We use it in cadavers, and it's often this thing where it's like, oh, that seems scary and toxic. I don't want that in my body. But again, this is another common misconception. Formaldehyde is actually a natural byproduct of our cell metabolism. We make formaldehyde every single day. And at any given time, we're going to have 10 times as much formaldehyde in a baby's body than is in a single vaccine. And if you really want to up your formaldehyde, you can eat a pear, and that has even more formaldehyde in it. So this is a very normal and common part of our cellular metabolism. It's a byproduct of our cells. So that's why it's used in vaccines, because we can use it to prevent any contaminants from being in the vaccine, and we know it's safe in our bodies. And if you give a vaccine, you're actually diluting the amount of formaldehyde in your body because it's more water than formaldehyde. It's less concentration of zinc. So that's those I think are the important points about vaccines. And then I always like to just call out kind of one of the ideas that I think is important to think about when we're thinking about vaccine ingredients. There's often a lot of just kind of concern and sometimes worries about some of the ingredients we see in vaccines that we just maybe don't understand. And so that's why I use this example. So this is an ingredient list, and you can see kind of all of the different chemicals in here. And the question I ask people is like, would you put this in your body? It's got water, it's got some sugars, but it's got all these different kind of proteins and threonine, isoleucine. It's got palmitic acid, omega fatty acid, all these different acids, all of these colors in it. So the question is like, what is this? Is this safe to eat? And the point I'm making here is that we often get scared of things that we don't necessarily understand or that we're not familiar with, but that has nothing to do with how dangerous they are. This is the ingredient list of a banana. You can make anything sound scary by just using, fancy medical jargon or whatever, technical words that we maybe aren't familiar with. I don't know all these acids, and at some point I might have known some of most of these amino acids, but these aren't things that we're familiar with, so they can sound a little scary if we don't know what they are. So it's important to just kind of think through, is this actually something dangerous, or is it just something I just am not familiar with? So point is, vaccine ingredients are very safe. We use only the ingredients necessary to protect us from disease in vaccines. There's no extra ingredients that aren't necessary. Every vaccine ingredient is picked very deliberately to be something that is required to create the best immune response with the fewest side effects, that is as safe as possible. And then other than that antigen, the protein or the sugar or the mRNA, all the other vaccine ingredients are found in our foods, our drinks, and common household products. They're things that we, deal with every day. That's why they were chosen as ingredients, because we know that our bodies are capable of processing them. Another question I get sometimes is about antigens. And as I mentioned, antigens refers to like anything that your body recognizes as foreign and creates an immune response to. So we're talking about proteins or sugars from the germ or the vaccine in this case. So this is something that I think some people often get worried about. You'll see, this is an accurate statement. You'll see, as of 2017, numbers are a little different now. But in 2017, a fully vaccinated child at the age of 10 will have gotten 173 antigens to protect them from 16 diseases. So 173 might sound like a big number, but if you put that in context, compared to 1980, we, by the age of 4, would be exposed to over 15,000 antigens from vaccines, and we would only be protected from 7 diseases. So this is actually a huge reduction in how much antigen exposure we have. And again, 15,000 might also sound like a big number, but even that is actually quite small if you look at the whole picture. In that we get exposed to thousands of antigens every single day. In a single office visit where you might go to get your vaccine, you're going to be exposed to more antigens in the office than from the vaccine. And by the time we're age 4, we're going to have about 3 to 8 million different antigens that our bodies will have been exposed to. And then, of course, I think just as important, when you get sick with a disease, those antigens are going to multiply millions and millions of times in your body, and you're going to get exposed to a lot more of those potentially harmful or inflammatory antigens than you would, through the vaccine itself, which could have prevented that illness. Okay, so moving on to vaccine side effects. So vaccine side effects, they vary a little bit from vaccine to vaccine, but mostly they're very similar. So really with almost any vaccine, you can expect that you're probably not going to have side effects. There's a very good chance you won't have any side effects. The most common side effects with any vaccine is going to be arm pain. So if you do have a side effect, it'll probably be arm pain, and you'll probably get just a little bit of soreness. You might also get redness or tenderness or maybe firmness around the site of the injection, but that's most common. But most vaccines can also cause some more annoying reactions that aren't as common, maybe 10-30% of people, just depends. But that'll include things like a fever or chills, maybe body aches, headaches, fatigue, nausea, vomiting. Some vaccines might cause diarrhea or abdominal pain in rare cases. Sometimes they'll cause rashes. Um, Generally, these are a result of your immune system just fighting off the antigen in the germ in the antigen in the vaccine, and creating the fever to try to make sure you're safe. Creating the stomach aches or the fatigue because you're working so hard. Your immune system working hard to get rid of the disease, so you feel a little more tired. So that's usually why you get those side effects. And again, they are generally very minor and will go away in a few days. Now, sometimes vaccine side effects can be a little more significant and make you feel pretty crummy and might even need to have you lying down for a couple of days. But that's not as common. It's more common in adults, but really not so much at all in kids. And that's really it. There are some severe or rare reactions that I'll go through, but they're generally very, very rare and treatable, and not as dangerous as the disease itself. I think the one a rare side effect that is potentially possible with any vaccine is a severe allergic reaction. Mild allergic reactions can happen to anything and aren't a big deal. Severe ones are things where you might have a drop in blood pressure, trouble breathing, and those can be dangerous if not treated. That happens in about maybe 1 to 5 people out of a million doses, based on depending on the disease or the vaccine. So very, very rare, and they are not dangerous when you get a vaccine in the U.S. because we have the means to quickly and adequately treat those. So I think it's important when we think about side effects that we have the full picture again. You're not just thinking about, do I want to get the vaccine and maybe have these side effects, or do I want to not get the vaccine and not have any side effects? Because that's not actually the choice you're making. The choice we make when we decide whether to vaccinate is, are you want to have the vaccine and know that you might have these side effects, or do you want to risk getting the disease itself, which can cause other side effects? So as an example here, I have COVID because we have really good numbers on this to be able to display this very accurately. The blue lines here represent the side effects of a COVID vaccine, and the red lines represent the side effects of COVID infection. So you can see all the side effects that the vaccine might cause are more like or less likely than the side effects you would get if you got sick. And several side effects of the infection or symptoms of infection can't happen from the vaccine. Like the vaccine is not going to give you shortness of breath. It's not going to give you loss of taste or smell. Importantly, it doesn't cause long-term symptoms as opposed to COVID infection, which it looks like may happen 1 in 3 people potentially could get long symptoms from what's called long COVID, which is, very challenging. And also, just as important, the COVID vaccine will not make you contagious to infect other people, as opposed to an infection where you could infect, 20 people or multiple people every time you get sick. And this is true for all vaccines. The side effects of any vaccine are going to be similar to and less severe and less common than the symptoms of the infection they prevent. I mentioned earlier the heart inflammation around COVID. So again, this is another good example. This is probably the most well-known rare side effect of vaccines. There are, other rare side effects of other vaccines as well. And I don't have time to kind of get through all of them today, but I picked this as an example. So the vaccine for COVID can cause this condition, 0.7 times less than, sorry, hang on. I think I lost my microphone. Can everyone still hear me?
I can hear you. Yep, you did cut out for a minute, but I can hear you now.
All right. Thank you. Hopefully that doesn't happen again. So in this age group where it's most common to get sick, if you have 10,000 people, 10,000 adolescent boys who get the COVID vaccine, less than one will get sick with heart inflammation. Compared to if they were unvaccinated, then almost five of those 10,000 would get heart inflammation. So you're still much safer getting the vaccine than not, because that COVID will cause heart inflammation much more commonly than the vaccine will. And the other important thing is the myocarditis you get from the COVID vaccine is not dangerous. It resolves within a few days, doesn't cause long-term problems, cannot be severe, as opposed to if you get COVID and get myocarditis because of COVID, it can be more problematic. And then another point along those lines, and again, still sticking with the example of COVID, a COVID vaccine cannot cause you to be sick enough to need to be in the ICU or stroke or have a stroke or to die. If you have 10,000 vaccines given, no one in that group will have these symptoms, as opposed to 10,000 COVID infections. You'll have quite a bit more. And again, this is also true for other illnesses. The numbers will be different, but there's no vaccine that will kill you if you give it to 10,000 people. No one will die from it, as opposed to all of the diseases are potentially lethal, potentially cause long-term side effects or problems or hospitalizations. So another thing to think about, that there are things that these illnesses can cause, no matter how rare they may be, that will just not happen if you get vaccinated. And then another common concern I get is long-term side effects. This is a particular concern I hear with COVID because it's pretty new, and then also sometimes with HPV because it's over 10 years old, but it's still a little new for adults, for parents these days, because we didn't get it when we were kids. So, bottom line is we already have enough information to know that, there aren't side effects. And the reason I'm confident for that, one is in the history of all vaccines, we've all side effects that we've found have occurred within 2 months of receiving the vaccine. And that makes sense if you think about what's going on. As I mentioned, how vaccines work, your body gets rid of everything in a vaccine within a few weeks of being vaccinated. So it just wouldn't really make sense that you get rid of all the components of the vaccine and it's completely out of your body, and then sometime in the long future some weird things pops up that you hadn't known before. So that's why it makes sense that when we do see side effects, they show up within 2 months. So if we haven't seen something by now, it's as far as I'm concerned, just not going to happen that we're going to see something new later. Really, the only time is in those first few million doses we might discover some really rare side effects. So yeah, that's I think most of the important things to know about side effects. Who shouldn't get a vaccine? This is a little different per vaccine, but in general, rule of thumb is if you've had a severe reaction to previous dose of vaccine, then you shouldn't receive that vaccine. Now, in my experience, a lot of my patients will think, oh, this might qualify as a severe reaction. Probably doesn't. Severe reaction is very specific. It means a severe allergic reaction in which you have, within the first 15 minutes, you have maybe some like really trouble with breathing, or really that's really it. Trouble with breathing would be the main thing. You might get lightheadedness after a vaccine, just like you might if you see blood or if you stand up too quickly. That's not a severe reaction. You might get, really sore achy afterwards. That's not a severe reaction. So it's really just a severe allergic reaction. And again, that's maybe 1 to 5 people per million doses of vaccine, just depending on the vaccine we're talking about. And so, yeah, the other thing would be if you're severely immunocompromised or if you're pregnant, you shouldn't receive live vaccines. So I mentioned this a little earlier. Those live vaccines like MMR, varicella, the chickenpox vaccine, those could potentially cause harm to someone who isn't able to fight off even the weakened virus vaccine. So for those people, it's even more important that everyone around them gets vaccinated so that they don't get sick from that disease that they can't create an immune response to. For pregnant people, I think it's always important just to have some context here. A lot of people I know, mothers I know, will say, I just didn't feel like getting this while I was pregnant. I waited until after, or like, I'm not sure if I should get this when I'm pregnant. And I always recommend, get your recommended vaccines while pregnant. They're recommended for a reason. If you get the vaccine, well, first off, you reduce your risk for complications during your pregnancy, complications that would affect your baby, and the risk of getting sick from that disease. But also, you provide protection for your baby for the next 6 months afterwards, because those parental antibodies prevent or reduce your child's risk of getting sick because you give them through the placenta to your baby. So this shows the relative risk of infection or hospitalization in 6 months after the first 6 months of life for a baby whose parent did or did not get a vaccine. So in blue, those are the relative rates of people, babies getting sick with COVID, flu, or pertussis in the first 6 months of life, compared to if their parent was vaccinated, compared to in red that same risk of illness if their parent was not vaccinated. So this is a really incredible way to just, you don't even have to poke your baby. You get to take the poke yourself. Your baby doesn't have to have any pain or discomfort whatsoever, and you get that protection for them for 6 months. Um, so the last thing I like to talk about on this point is just how we compare the risk of vaccinating versus not vaccinating. And this image comes from one of our educational videos. These cartoons we made at boostoregon.org. It's our website. They're available for free. I think they're really cute and I like them a lot. But the idea here is that on the left here, you see this little character is meant to represent an immune system. And on the left, you see this guy's just been through this really big fight and he's really beat up and hurt because he was unvaccinated, unprepared, and he had to fight really hard to fight off this disease. And he needed all these medicines. You see these pills and capsules in there, all these antibiotics, maybe steroids or other medical interventions to get through it. So he's still survived. And most kiddos today, most people today will survive any given vaccine preventable disease. But that doesn't mean they won't need to be in the hospital, maybe need to be on a ventilator, maybe need, even if a very minor illness, still need antibiotics that wipes out all of your good gut bacteria and causes diarrhea and potentially other problems. Compared to on the right side here, this immune system who got his vaccine, who was prepared and knew how to fight this germ, and when that germ came along, it didn't the person probably didn't even realize they were exposed because the immune system was able to get rid of it so quickly. So the idea here is, it's good to take as many measures as we can to be safe. Make sure you're washing your hands and eating a healthy diet and getting plenty of sleep and avoiding people when they're sick or wearing masks when you're sick, avoid getting others sick. But at the end of the day, you cannot completely eliminate your risk of getting exposed to a germ. And we will all inevitably be exposed to many dangerous germs throughout our lives. And the ones we can vaccinate against allow us to prepare ourselves ahead of time. So when the time comes that that germ does enter our body, when someone coughs on us or sneezes at us, or we just touch a doorknob that someone else had touched, or we're just walking around and happen to walk through some floating pathogen, our bodies know what to do and they can fight them off. And we prevent, we don't have to deal with all of this illness in the first place. I often have patients who wonder, well, maybe I should just get sick with the disease and they'll have, immunity from the natural disease instead. And my response is, well, why would you want to get sick in the first place? Like, I don't actually care if my patients or I or even my baby are immune to a disease. I just want to not get sick, and I want my baby to not get sick. So I'm not going to let my baby get sick so that she's immune to a disease that she won't get sick against to later. I don't want to get sick in the first place. So that's what a Oh,
Are you there?
yes, I'm here.
Okay.
You still hear me?
Yes, I hear you now. Yep.
All right. Sorry, that's issue with my yeah, this thing keeps cutting out. Sorry about that. So yeah, anyway, so this was when my baby was about 9 months, and I was visiting my dad and then my grandmother who are here in Texas, where they live. And this is why I vaccinate, because I wanted to make sure that I wanted to be able to go. This was in 2021, so this was like early COVID, and I wanted to make sure that I was taking every possible precaution to protect my baby and my grandmother, who's 84. I made sure I said, "Hey, make sure you get your COVID vaccine, Grandma, before we come and visit." Um, because I wanted to reduce as much as possible the risk of her getting sick and the risk of my baby getting sick. So we made sure we had our COVID, our flu vaccines. My baby had her vaccines. So this is why it's important to me. I think of it like a seatbelt. Like I'm going to drive as safely as I can. I'm not going to be inebriated when I drive. Make sure my baby is in her car seat every time, and also I'm still going to make sure the seatbelt is on. I'm not going to just skip one security step because I'm taking, driving carefully. So it's just that extra level of security to make sure that in the case of something terrible happening, I've done everything possible to reduce the risk of harm. So that's why I vaccinate, and that's kind of some of the most important information um, for me about vaccines. I hope that's been helpful. And if there are any questions anyone has now, if there's anything that I didn't go through in enough detail, I'm happy to answer that now.
Awesome. We do have a couple questions. I'm going to share my screen just so I can get the QR code up. Let's see if I can. Could you stop sharing yours and then I'll just quick turn mine on?
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, you're
Sure
good.
thing. There we go.
Perfect. All right. So thank you for that wonderful presentation. When I saw the banana example, before I saw it was bananas, I was just like, I wonder what it's going to be. So that was very interesting. And before we move into the Q&A, I'd like to remind you that there is an evaluation survey available. You can scan the QR code on the slide. We will also be sending up in a follow-up email. So we've had, let's see, a couple of questions come in live here. Curious why so many sugars in the vaccine.
Um, yeah, so the example I gave of HIB had that just sucrose. Sugars and salts are used in vaccines as what are called stabilizing agents or buffers. So so like salts, for example, will be used to make sure that the pH of the vaccine is right. So vaccines are a liquid; they're suspended in a liquid that we inject in our body. So we don't want it to be too acidic or too basic, or it will, be painful. So that is why those are different salts buffers in there. Sugars as well; they can help to keep the vaccine suspended in the liquid. So because you don't want to inject just a powder into your body, so it keeps it all suspended in this liquid solvent. So that's why those are in there, and they also help with just what's called the salinity of it. So if you put just water into your body, it can draw out other nutrients from your cellular spaces and your vessels, and that can be a little uncomfortable. So it makes it so that it's more similar to what's already in your body, so that you don't experience any kind of those potentially painful or uncomfortable symptoms.
Thank you for that. And then a couple questions that came in during registration. More information on how vaccines used to be developed and to how they are developed now. I think you kind of covered a little bit and how to demyth the population that believes mercury is being used, which you did kind of cover some of that, but anything else you want to share?
Yeah, the history of vaccines is really interesting, and there's there's been a lot of positive changes in the way we make vaccines. I kind of alluded to we've become a lot better at making vaccines and we know more about it. Just like any science, the more we learn and practice, the better we get at it. So we can now make more vaccines to more diseases and use fewer antigens, have better ingredients that cause fewer side effects. So, the vaccines today generally are much less, cause much lower risk of side effects than vaccines of the past. Some are the same as we've had for years. Like the MMR vaccine hasn't changed much because it just already was really good. Um, but another big change is just the kind of the safety mechanisms in place. I went through the trials, the clinical trials are required and everything. If you look at vaccine history, when vaccines first came around, the first vaccine, the smallpox, um, it was inoculation with the what was it, cowpox. That was the first kind of inoculation that preceded kind of modern vaccination. Things were a lot different. When I think the original Hep B vaccine was made, it was, the guy who made it just kind of went to this place where this institution where a bunch of mentally delayed children were and used the vaccine on them. Now, his intention was like these were highest risk kids who needed it most, but also, there's some significant ethical quandaries with just, vaccinating a population of only handicapped children and also, children who can't potentially who don't have anyone to provide consent for them. So in particular, there's a lot more change in kind of consent and monitoring about who can be studied and when you can do a study on someone and who can be studied on, and then how those studies need to be carried out. And then regulations and manufacturing process are much better. So there's a lot of really good books. One is Vaccinated is one I've read that I really like, but it goes through this history a lot. Polio is another example. When that first came out, we didn't have the same monitoring systems we did today, and it was it saved so many lives and prevented so much illness. And also, there was a very notable case of a manufacturing facility that kind of got their formula wrong, and they actually caused an outbreak of polio from their vaccine, and that had to be recalled. And that was a really big public health disaster, and it happened because there wasn't enough oversight and regulation in place. So since then, we now have very much more robust systems, and that kind of thing just has not happened, in the last 5, 7 decades.
Thank you for that. And one more that came in during registration was how to support educate families who don't want to vaccinate or aren't sure where to start learning.
Yeah. Um, so I would say if anyone who doesn't want to vaccinate, I would not encourage you to kind of share all the information I've shared today. This is kind of this information is, I think, helpful for people who are thirsty for knowledge, who want to learn, and who are interested in learning more. But if someone really isn't at a place where they just feel like I don't want it, I'm not ready, like it just doesn't help to just shout at them with facts and say, well, look at all this stuff, because people really need to be ready to learn, to want to learn. And if you're not in a place to do that, they can just feel it can make people feel very defensive and not really interested and not listened to. So I recommend kind of starting with an approach of curiosity and figuring out, okay, what are your concerns and like how much do you want to learn right now, and how can I help. And this is what we do at Boost Oregon. So you can certainly refer people to our website and resources we have. Um, and I do offer other trainings where go into much more detail about like if you are, a health provider or a community health worker, or just someone who wants to have these conversations effectively. I have a whole nother talk where I talk about like how do you do this in a way that is respectful and effective, and will actually help people, empower people to make decisions and be confident about vaccines. But it's about starting with a place of respect and mutual collaboration, and using what we call motivational interviewing to really explore another person's readiness to change and why they might want to change and what information would be helpful, rather than just giving a bunch of information they may not necessarily need.
Okay, two more questions in the Q&A. Can you speak to the timeline of getting a vaccine FDA approved and if the timeline was different with COVID-19 vaccine development?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I apologize for not doing that earlier. It just didn't want to take up too much time, but it is a question I get a lot. So main difference there, I think important things to know, there were no steps skipped in the COVID vaccine development compared to other vaccines. The difference is with COVID, because we were in a pandemic and we were, trying to get this out to the public as soon as possible. One difference, a big difference, is that we just were able to go through a lot of those steps much more quickly because we had money. There were trillions of dollars put into Operation Warp Speed and other operations around the globe that allowed us to get it done. So we just had the money for the pharmaceutical vaccine developers to go through these phase 1 and 2 and 3 trials and cut through all this red tape and not have to worry about risk analysis and like will this be profitable or not, because they were going to get paid regardless. And so that was a big factor. And I think it speaks volumes to the fact that, if we could prioritize public health generally, we could make a lot more medical interventions. Like there's a whole bunch of rare diseases out there and even not so rare diseases that we could I think, readily cure if there was enough political and public willpower to spend money to get it done. But since there's not, that doesn't always happen. There were a few other factors, including the fact that there were a lot of people who volunteered for the trials. It's often hard to find volunteers for clinical trials, but in the case of COVID, it took no time at all for thousands of people to say, yeah, please put me in that trial. So that made it easy to fill up the trials. And the disease was everywhere, so it was also really easy to see how effective the vaccine is, because the people who did in the placebo group of the trials were getting sick at very high rates, so it was easy to compare the difference. One other main difference is that the FDA did issue an emergency use authorization before the biological license authorization, which is the typical vaccine licensing. So this allowed them to license the vaccine or provide the vaccine to the public before phase 3 trials were all the way complete. They just said, we have enough information after 2 months of trials to know that it is safe enough and effective enough that it will be better for people to get this than to not get the vaccine. And so that was one key difference there.
Okay, and one more. Do we know if those vaccinated against chickenpox as a child will have shingles at the same rate as those not vaccinated?
It's a great question. You're less likely to have shingles, or at least it's not going to be nearly as significant. You can get shingles if you were vaccinated against chickenpox, but it's typically very, very minor by comparison to shingles if you, like me, were not around for the varicella vaccine and got chickenpox instead. So you can get it, but it's not going to be as bad.
Okay, I don't see anything else. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. That was great. Thank you to Dr. Hassan for presenting and all the attendees for being here today. To stay connected with us, you can follow us on Healthy NODAC on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Foundation for Healthy North Dakota on LinkedIn. Also, to join the coalition, visit the link to stay aware of future webinars and updates on the foundation. And here's another opportunity to scan the QR code. Additionally, we are interested in hearing about your experiences, and we highly value stories from community members. If you know of anyone or have a story to share about how a disease has impacted your life, you can email me directly or leave a brief description in the survey. So thank you so much to everyone, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.